What if the key to a $10 million corporate deal wasn't in the boardroom, but on the notepad of a waitress clearing the table? This isn't just a story. It's a look into a moment where an entire empire teetered on the edge of disaster. And the one person who could save it was the one person nobody would ever listen to. A billionaire, a genius scientist, and a waitress with a secret that could destroy them both. She saw the fatal flaw, the lie hidden in plain sight on a glowing tablet screen. With everything to lose, she leaned in and whispered the 5 words that would change everything. That's the wrong formula. The clinking of ice in crystal glasses was the metronome of wealth. It set the tempo for the hushed, important conversations that echoed off the mahogany-paneled walls of the Gilded Compass. A restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a reputation. For Sarah Jenkins, the sound was just another part of the symphony of a life she served but could never afford to live. Her black uniform was impeccably pressed, a stark contrast to the exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. Each step on the plush Persian rug was a reminder of the chasm between her past and her present. 2 years ago, her world had been one of sterile, clean rooms, the hum of mass spectrometers, and the thrilling, almost divine pursuit of discovery. She had been Dr. Sarah Jenkins, or on the cusp of it, a doctoral candidate at Caltech whose dissertation on protein stabilization was poised to revolutionize therapeutic medicine. Her mind, a place of elegant molecular structures and complex equations, was now occupied with memorizing the Vacherin du Mont d'Or and the pan-seared foie gras with fig chutney. The contrast was a daily grinding humiliation. Tonight, the centerpiece of the restaurant's quiet drama was Table 7, nestled in a secluded alcove with a panoramic view of the glittering San Francisco skyline. It was occupied by 2 men who radiated the kind of power that warped the air around them. The first was Arthur Vance, a man whose name was synonymous with venture capital and biotech innovation. His face, etched with the shrewd lines of 1,000 calculated risks, was a permanent fixture in the financial news. Vance didn't just invest in companies, he absorbed them, his Midas touch turning nascent ideas into global behemoths. Across from him sat Dr. Marcus Thorne, a man Sarah knew with a visceral, soul-deep sickness. He was handsome in the predatory way of a hawk, his silver-streaked hair swept back perfectly, his smile a carefully calibrated instrument of charm. He was the CEO of GeneVex Therapeutics, the startup he was pitching to Vance. He was also the man who had stolen her life's work, her future, and her name. Sarah's hands, steady from years of handling delicate lab equipment, trembled slightly as she refilled their water glasses. She kept her eyes downcast, her face a neutral mask she had perfected over countless shifts. Thorne didn't even glance at her. To him, she was part of the decor, a faceless cog in the machine of service. The irony was a bitter pill in her throat. The very technology he was pitching, the groundbreaking formula he was about to sell for a staggering $10 million, was born in her mind and meticulously documented in her notebooks. The core of our platform, Arthur, Thorne was saying, his voice a smooth, confident baritone, is the ST4 catalyst. It's a synthetic polypeptide chain that essentially creates a bioinert scaffold around therapeutic proteins. Think of it as molecular bubble wrap. It solves the degradation problem that has plagued monoclonal antibodies for a decade. Vance swirled the deep red wine in his glass, his eyes narrowed in concentration. He was a lion, and Thorne was laying out a feast. Degradation is a costly problem, Vance conceded, his voice a low rumble. Your data suggests a 98% stability rate over a 24-month period at room temperature. That's not just impressive, it's unheard of. It's the future, Thorne said, leaning forward, the very picture of visionary passion. No more cold chain logistics, a paradigm shift in drug accessibility for developing nations. The humanitarian applications are as significant as the financial ones. Sarah felt a surge of nausea. He was using her own words, the very sentiments she had poured into her research proposals. The humanitarian angle had been her driving force. For Thorne, it was just another selling point, a gilded frame for his greed. As she moved to clear the bread plates, Thorne swiped his finger across the tablet lying on the table, pulling up a complex diagram. It was a 3D rendering of a molecule, a beautiful, intricate lattice of atoms. And below it, a string of characters that made her blood run cold, followed by a series of equations detailing its binding affinity and enthalpy of reaction. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She froze for a fraction of a second, her professional veneer cracking. Vance, ever observant, noticed the slight hesitation. His gaze flickered towards her, a momentary, dismissive curiosity. She quickly recovered, gathering the plates, her mind racing faster than it had in years. It was almost perfect. Almost. Thorne had been brilliant in his theft, transcribing her work with near-flawless accuracy. But he wasn't a true creator. He was a mimic. He understood the results, but he had never truly grasped the delicate, foundational principles. He didn't understand the why behind the what, and in that ignorance, he had made a mistake. A tiny, almost imperceptible error in the final formula, a single molecular substitution that he must have misread from her handwritten notes. She could see it in her mind's eye, her frantic, late-night scrawl, the way she looped her lowercase g, which could be mistaken for a y. He had substituted a glycine residue for a tyrosine, a seemingly minor change. But her simulations, the hundreds of hours she had spent running quantum calculations, had shown that this exact substitution would create a fatal flaw. It wouldn't be apparent in short-term trials the kind of data Thorne was presenting. The molecule would appear stable, but over time, under specific thermal stress, that tyrosine residue would create a prionic fold, a catastrophic, irreversible misfolding of the protein it was meant to protect. The drug wouldn't just become inert, it would become toxic. The deal was for $10 million, but it was just the beginning. Vance's company, Omnigen, would pour hundreds of millions into development and clinical trials based on this flawed foundation. It would pass initial safety tests, but once it hit the market, once it was in the veins of thousands, perhaps millions of people, the result would be a disaster of unprecedented scale. It would be a corporate apocalypse and a human tragedy. Thorne was now pulling up the financial projections, his voice painting a future of hockey stick growth and market dominance. Vance was listening, a slow nod indicating he was close to being convinced. The final handshake was moments away. Sarah stood by the service station, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the marble counter. Every instinct screamed at her to stay silent. She had signed an ironclad NDA when Thorne had forced her out, an agreement written by a team of predatory lawyers. To speak up was to invite a lawsuit that would obliterate what little she had left. Thorne would deny everything, paint her as a disgruntled, unstable ex-employee. Who would believe a waitress over a celebrated CEO? It was career suicide. It was financial ruin. It was insane. But then an image flashed in her mind. A sick child in a rural clinic receiving a life-saving drug that was, in fact, a slow-acting poison. Her work, her dream, twisted into a weapon of unknowing harm. Her silence would make her complicit. The waiter for table 7 was approaching with the dessert menus. This was her last chance. The moment was a razor's edge. Her entire life had led her to this single point in time, in this gilded room, where she was the only person in the world who knew the truth. Fear and resolve warred within her, a hurricane in the pit of her stomach. She picked up a fresh water pitcher, her hand now perfectly steady. She walked back toward the table, her steps measured and deliberate. Vance and Thorne looked up as she approached, their conversation pausing. She leaned in, ostensibly to refill Arthur Vance's glass. Her voice when it came was no louder than the rustle of a leaf. A ghost of a sound meant only for him, cutting through the opulent silence. "Mr. Vance," she whispered, her eyes locked on his, conveying an urgency that defied her station. "That's the wrong formula." The world seemed to slow down. The murmur of the other diners, the distant clatter from the kitchen, the soft strains of a jazz trio in the lounge, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. For Arthur Vance, the universe had contracted to the space of a few inches between his ear and the waitress's lips. The 5 words she had spoken were absurd, a nonsensical intrusion into a multi-million-dollar negotiation. Yet they landed with the concussive force of a physical blow. His first reaction was a flash of irritation. Was this a prank? An act of corporate espionage from a rival, using some theatrically placed plant? He had seen stranger things. He studied the woman. She wasn't an actress playing a part. There was no artifice in her expression. Her face, pale under the soft lighting, was a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. But her eyes held a conviction that was as solid and unyielding as granite. It was the look of someone who had just jumped off a cliff and was waiting for the impact. Thorne, oblivious, continued his monologue about market penetration strategies. Serena, when with our proprietary synthesis process, the cost of goods will be 30% lower than current market leaders, allowing us to... Vance held up a single manicured finger, cutting him off mid-sentence. Thorne's mouth snapped shut, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. Vance's gaze remained locked on Sarah. He didn't speak to her. Not yet. He turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her, and gave a nearly imperceptible nod towards the arched hallway, leading to the private tasting rooms. It was a silent command. Go there. Wait. Sarah's breath hitched. She straightened up, her movement stiff and robotic, and gave a slight nod in return. Without another word, she turned and walked away from the table, the water pitcher still clutched in her hand. The few steps she took across the dining room felt like a mile-long walk across a tightrope, the stares of the other staff burning into her back. Thorne watched her go, a bemused, slightly condescending smile playing on his lips. Apologies, Arthur. The service here is usually impeccable. I'll have a word with the maître d'. Don't, Vance said, his voice flat and cold. The warmth had vanished from his tone, replaced by an arctic chill that Thorne had never heard before. Vance picked up the tablet, his thumb hovering over the molecular diagram. Tell me about the synthesis process again, Marcus. Specifically the role of the tyrosine residue at position 34. The question was a surgeon's scalpel, precise and unexpected. Thorne's smile faltered, just for a second, but he recovered quickly. Tyrosine 34. An excellent question. It's a key anchoring point. Its phenolic group forms a hydrogen bond with the target protein's tertiary structure, creating a conformational lock. It's one of the foundational elements of the scaffold's integrity. He delivered the lines smoothly, a perfect recitation from a memorized script. A conformational lock, Vance repeated, his eyes boring into Thorne. And you're certain it's tyrosine? Not, say, another amino acid? Glycine, for instance? This time, the fracture in Thorne's composure was undeniable. It was a hairline crack, but in the high-pressure environment Vance had just created, it was as revealing as a chasm. A tiny muscle twitched in Thorne's jaw. His eyes darted around the room, a subconscious search for an exit. Glycine? Thorne laughed, a sound that was a fraction too loud, too forced. No, absolutely not. Glycine lacks the necessary side chain. It would be structurally inert, useless. Our simulations were exhaustive. It has to be tyrosine. Why do you ask? Just thorough, Vance said, his voice deceptively casual. He placed the tablet face down on the table. The deal, which had been simmering at a perfect temperature, was now cooling rapidly. Excuse me for a moment, Marcus. I need to make a quick call. Vance stood up, a towering figure whose tailored suit seemed to be woven from shadow and authority. He didn't walk towards the restrooms or the exit. He walked directly down the hallway he had indicated to Sarah, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He found her in the Burgundy Room, a small, unused private dining area filled with racks of ridiculously expensive wine. She was standing by a window, her back to the door, her shoulders trembling. She looked small and vulnerable, dwarfed by the opulence around her. He closed the door behind him, the heavy wood muffling the sounds of the restaurant. The click of the latch echoed in the silence. You have 60 seconds, Vance said, his voice devoid of emotion. It was the voice he used when a company's CEO had just missed their quarterly earnings projection by $100 million. Before I have you removed for disrupting one of the most important meetings of my year, start talking. Who are you? Sarah turned to face him. The terror was still there, but it was now overlaid with a fierce, desperate resolve. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I was a researcher at GeneVex. I was the lead, and for a time, the only researcher on Project Chimera, which is what he called it before he rebranded it. That formula, the ST4 catalyst, I invented it. Vance's expression remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened. You invented it, and now you're waiting tables at the Gilded Compass. It's a compelling story, but it has a few narrative gaps. Fill them in. He stole it, she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. When I had the breakthrough, when I finalized the core sequence, he isolated me from the project. He buried my contributions, reassigned my lab access, and then fabricated a performance review citing insubordination and lack of collaborative spirit. He fired me. He had me sign an NDA that prevents me from talking about any of my work there, with a penalty clause that would indebt me for the rest of my life. He knew I couldn't afford a lawyer to fight it. And the formula on that tablet? What's wrong with it? Vance pressed, his focus absolute. This was the moment. The technical details had to be perfect. It's a substitution error, she said, stepping closer. In my final notation, I specified a glycine residue at position 34 in the polypeptide chain. Glycine is the smallest amino acid. Its lack of a side chain creates a point of essential flexibility, allowing the scaffold to adapt to the target protein's thermal vibrations. He substituted it with tyrosine. On paper and in short-term analysis, tyrosine looks stronger. Its phenolic group does form a hydrogen bond, as he said. It creates a more rigid structure. She saw a flicker of understanding in Vance's eyes. He was following her. He wasn't just a money man. He had a deep scientific background. It was why he was so successful. But that rigidity is the flaw, she continued, her words coming faster now, the science pouring out of her like a released flood. My long-duration simulations, the ones he never saw because he locked me out of the system before they were complete, showed that under prolonged physiological stress, a fever, for example, the tyrosine bond induces a misfold cascade. The scaffold doesn't just detach, it collapses and acts as a seed for protein aggregation. It creates prions. The formula he is selling you won't just fail, Mr. Vance. It will kill people. The stabilization equation is off. The Gibbs free energy of folding is deceptively negative in initial states, but he's not accounting for the entropic penalty of the tyrosine side chain under thermal duress. The correct formula relies on flexibility, not rigidity. His version is a molecular time bomb. She stopped, breathless, her chest heaving. She had said it. The truth was out, hanging in the air of the silent, wine-filled room. She had just violated her NDA in the most spectacular way imaginable. She had accused a celebrated CEO of fraud and implicitly of potential manslaughter. She had bet her entire future on this one moment, on this one man's ability to see past her uniform and hear the truth in her words. Vance was silent for a long time. He walked over to a wine rack, his fingers ghosting over a dusty bottle of Chateau Petrus. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, fermented grapes, and unbearable tension. Sarah's hope began to wither. He was going to dismiss her. He would call security. Her life was over. Finally, he turned back to her. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold calculation. If you're lying, he said slowly, his voice a blade of ice, I will personally fund Marcus Thorne's lawsuit against you until you have nothing left. I will ensure you never work in a professional capacity again, not even as a waitress. Your name will be a byword for fraud. He took a step closer, his presence filling the small room. But if you're telling the truth, then Mr. Thorne has made a very serious miscalculation. He pulled out his phone, a sleek black rectangle, and dialed a number. Robert, he said into the phone, his voice now crisp and authoritative, cancel my afternoon and get our biotech litigation team on standby. I have a situation and a potential asset. Her name is Sarah Jenkins. Returning to the table was one of the most surreal experiences of Arthur Vance's life. The atmosphere, once charged with the electric potential of a $10 million deal, was now thick with a cloying, unspoken tension. Marcus Thorne was nursing a glass of scotch, the picture of forced nonchalance. But Vance, a connoisseur of human behavior, could see the tells. Thorne's posture was too rigid. His fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the arm of his chair. He was an animal that had sensed a predator nearby but could not yet see it. Everything all right, Arthur? Thorne asked, his smile a little too bright. Perfectly, Vance replied smoothly, resuming his seat. He gestured for the dessert menus, an act of deliberate, unnerving normalcy. I think we should celebrate. This has been a most illuminating discussion. The word illuminating hung in the air between them. For Thorne, it was a confirmation that the deal was proceeding. For Vance, it was a private, bitter irony. He played his part perfectly, discussing the finer points of the acquisition, the integration of GeneVex's team into OmniGen's corporate structure, all while his mind was a whirlwind of calculations and contingency plans. The waitress, Sarah Jenkins, had thrown a grenade into the proceedings, and he was now carefully examining the pin. He had built his empire on one fundamental principle: trust, but verify with extreme prejudice. He didn't entirely believe Sarah yet, but her explanation was too specific, too scientifically dense to be a simple fabrication. The jargon, the mention of Gibbs free energy, the prionic fold, it wasn't the language of a disgruntled employee seeking simple revenge. It was the language of a creator watching her creation be perverted. The rest of the dinner was a masterclass in corporate theater. Vance agreed in principle to the $10 million figure, contingent on a final, accelerated due diligence review. He suggested they sign the preliminary term sheet right there. Thorne, eager to lock in the deal and banish the strange unease of the past half hour, readily agreed. As Thorne signed the document with a flourish of his expensive pen, Vance felt a cold knot of satisfaction. The term sheet was non-binding, but Thorne's signature was an act of commitment. He was pushing his chips into the center of the table, completely unaware that Vance had just been shown his hand. After a final handshake, Thorne left the restaurant, radiating an aura of triumph. He was a $10 million man, on the cusp of everything he had ever wanted. Vance remained at the table. He gestured to the maitre d'. "I'd like to speak with one of your staff, the waitress who was serving this table earlier, Sarah Jenkins, in private." Minutes later, Sarah was brought back to the now empty burgundy room. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by a profound, trembling exhaustion. She looked at Vance, her fate resting entirely in his hands. "You've made an extraordinary claim," Vance began, getting straight to the point. "And you've put me in a difficult position. I am on the verge of acquiring a company for a significant sum. Your unsubstantiated allegation could derail that. So we need to move beyond allegations. We need proof." "My lab notebooks," Sarah said immediately. "My original simulation data. It's all on the GeneVex servers. He wouldn't have deleted it. Marcus is an arrogant man, but he's also a pack rat. He would see my research as his property now. He would lock it away, but he wouldn't destroy it. He'd want to keep the source material of his genius. And your access to these servers was revoked?" "Completely. My credentials, my key card, everything was wiped the day I was fired." Vance steepled his fingers, his gaze intense. "This NDA you signed, do you have a copy?" Sarah shook her head. "They never gave me one. They had their lawyer present it. I was in shock. I signed it just to get out of the room. It was foolish, I know." "Not foolish. Coerced," Vance corrected her. "Robert, my head of security and corporate intelligence, is already running a background check on you. It will be thorough. It will dig into your time at Caltech, your publications, your academic record, your departure from GeneVex. If we find anything that contradicts your story, anything at all, this conversation is over." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "You won't." "I hope not," Vance said. "Now I need you to write down everything you remember, the specific molecular sequence of your formula, the correct one, the file names for your simulation data, the project directory paths on the server, the names of any other lab technicians or colleagues who might have seen your early work, even tangentially. Every detail, no matter how small." He slid a pristine, leather-bound notebook and a gold fountain pen across the table. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah felt a flicker of her old self return. A pen in her hand felt more natural than a serving tray. For the next hour, she wrote. The equations and formulas flowed from her, a language she had once been fluent in. She drew the molecular structures from memory, annotating the critical glycine residue. She listed file paths like Jotsha, GeneVex server, 011, research of project, Chimera, SHA simulations, SHA-Q Chem Run 7B, and named colleagues who had since left the company. It was a forensic map of her stolen work. As she wrote, Vance made a series of quiet, coded phone calls. He spoke to Robert, his security chief, arranging for a discreet team to be assembled. He spoke to his chief legal counsel, outlining a hypothetical scenario of intellectual property theft and corporate fraud. He was mobilizing his army, a force of lawyers, forensic accountants, and cybersecurity experts that Thorne could never imagine. When she finally pushed the notebook back towards him, her hand was aching, but her mind was clear. "This is everything I can remember," she said. Vance scanned the pages, his eyes moving with practiced speed. He paused at the drawing of the two molecular structures, hers and Thorne's, side by side. "The difference is elegant," he mused almost to himself, "and brutal. One substitution. It's the kind of mistake a thief would make, missing the subtlety, opting for what appears to be a stronger, more obvious solution." He closed the notebook and stood up. "My car is waiting outside. You'll be coming with me. We're going to a secure location. You will be a guest of my company until this is resolved. You will be provided with a legal team. From this moment on, you do not speak to anyone about this. You do not go back to your apartment. You do not contact your friends or family." As far as the world is concerned, Sarah Jenkins finished her shift tonight and vanished. The finality of his words was chilling, but it was also a shield. For the first time since she had been cast out of GeneVex, she was not alone. She had traded her apron for a seat at the table with one of the most powerful men in the country. The price of that seat was the truth, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. As they walked out of the restaurant through a private rear exit, leaving the world of the Gilded Compass behind, Sarah took one last look at the glittering city. It looked different now. It was no longer a monument to her failure, but a battlefield where the fight for her life's work was about to begin. The next 48 hours were a blur of sterile luxury and intense pressure. Sarah found herself in a penthouse suite at a 5-star hotel that Vance's corporation kept on permanent retainer. It was a gilded cage, far more opulent than the restaurant, but a cage nonetheless. Her guards were a discreet, middle-aged couple named Frank and Helen, who introduced themselves as being from Mr. Vance's executive protection detail. They were polite, professional, and ever-present. Her every need was met, but her freedom was gone. During this time, Vance's machine was in full motion. Robert, a former FBI cybercrime agent with a face like a clenched fist, became her primary point of contact. He and a team of data forensics experts set up a command center in the suite's living room, turning the plush space into a nest of laptops, encrypted hard drives, and secure satellite phones. Her role was to be the ghost in the machine, the guiding intelligence for their digital excavation. They put her in front of a powerful workstation, and for the first time in 2 years, she felt the familiar thrill of the hunt. "We need a way in," Robert said, his voice a low growl. "The GeneVex servers are a fortress. Standard penetration tests will be detected instantly." "They have a quarterly data migration protocol," Sarah said, her fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up a schematic of a network architecture she knew by heart. "For off-site backups, it happens on the first Sunday of every quarter. During the migration window, a specific port is opened for about 15 minutes to sync with the archival server in Nevada. The security protocols are slightly relaxed on that port. Marcus was always too cheap to pay for a dedicated fiber line, so he relied on a standard VPN tunnel. If you can hit that port during the migration, you might get in." Robert shared a look with his lead technician, a young woman with neon pink hair named Cora. "That's a small window," Cora said, "and the next one is tomorrow morning at 3 a.m. "It's our best shot," Sarah insisted. As the team prepared for the infiltration, Sarah's mind kept drifting back, replaying the slow, painful erosion of her life at GeneVex. The memories, long suppressed, returned with a cinematic and painful clarity. She remembered the early days. Marcus Thorne had been her mentor, or so she thought. He had recruited her straight out of her PhD program, promising her a lab of her own and complete academic freedom. In the beginning, he was charming, brilliant, and inspiring. They would work late into the night, fueled by coffee and the sheer excitement of discovery, scribbling equations on whiteboards. The Chimera Project was her brainchild, born from a single radical idea in her dissertation. Thorne had loved it. He had called her a genius. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday night. After months of failed simulations, she had tried a counterintuitive approach, introducing a strategic point of weakness, the glycine residue, into the polypeptide chain. The models lit up. The numbers were perfect. The Gibbs free energy equation resolved into a beautiful, stable negative value across all thermal simulations. It was all about the entropy. The flexibility of the glycine allowed for a higher degree of molecular freedom, which became the dominant factor at higher temperatures, offsetting the slight weakness in enthalpy. Rigidity was the enemy. Flexibility was the key. She had stared at the screen, tears of joy streaming down her face. She had done it. She had called Thorne at home, her voice choked with emotion, to tell him the news. He had been ecstatic. The next day he took her out to celebrate at a restaurant that, in a cruel twist of fate, was just down the street from the Gilded Compass. He had toasted her brilliance, her future. He had called her his partner. That was the peak. The descent was swift and brutal. The week after, a new senior biochemist was hired, a man loyal only to Thorne. Sarah's project access was suddenly compartmentalized. To protect the IP, Thorne had explained with his reassuring smile. Then her team was reassigned to other projects. Soon she was the only one with full access to the Chimera data, and Thorne was her only point of contact. He began to have meetings about the project to which she wasn't invited. She remembered the day she found a draft of a patent application on the office printer. The inventor was listed as Dr. Marcus Thorne. Her name was nowhere on it. When she confronted him, his charm evaporated, replaced by a chilling coldness. "This is a corporate asset, Sarah," he had told her, his eyes like chips of ice. "You are an employee. Your work belongs to the company, and I direct the company's strategy." The final act was her termination. He had called her into his office, a file in his hands. He accused her of trying to sabotage the project, of refusing to cooperate with the new team. It was a complete fabrication, a corporate gaslighting of the highest order. She was escorted out by security, her personal effects in a cardboard box, the humiliating gazes of her former colleagues following her out the door. The NDA was the final turn of the screw, ensuring her silence. The memories fueled her now. The pain, the humiliation, the burning sense of injustice. It all became a cold, hard fuel for her focus. At 2:55 a.m., the command center in the hotel suite was silent and tense. Cora's fingers danced over her keyboard. "Migration protocol has been initiated," she whispered. "The port is open. I have a 15-minute window." "I'm in," she said a few moments later, her voice tight with concentration. "But the directory structure is a mess. It's all been reorganized. The file paths you gave us are dead, Sarah." "He's hidden it," Sarah said, leaning over Cora's shoulder, her eyes scanning the lines of code. "Search for archival folders. Look for non-standard encryption." Marcus was always paranoid about corporate espionage. He used a custom encryption key based on something personal. Try his daughter's birthday or his dog's name. "Trying? Nothing," Cora said, her brow furrowed. "The encryption is military grade." Sarah's mind raced. What was Thorne arrogant enough to believe was uncrackable? What was personal to him, but also a monument to his ego? "Try the name of his first patent," Sarah said suddenly, "the one that made his career before GeneVex. It was for a synthetic enzyme. A1138. Try that as the key." Cora's fingers typed. A moment of silence. Then a new window bloomed on the screen, a list of files appearing like ghosts from the past. "Holy," Cora breathed. "We're in. I'm seeing file names. Chimera, SIM data, final, glycine pathway, analysis, project notes S. Jenkins." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her name. He had kept her name on the files in his own private archive. It was the ultimate act of hubris, stealing her work but keeping the evidence, like a killer keeping a souvenir. "Get it all," Robert commanded. "And find me one more thing. Thorne has to have another patent pending, one that covers the fix or the next generation of this tech. It's the classic fraud playbook: sell a flawed asset while secretly controlling the solution. Search his personal directories for any communication with patent attorneys." "Searching," Cora said. A few tense minutes passed. "Got it. A draft application. It's for a secondary stabilization agent. It's designed to counteract protein aggregation at elevated temperatures. Sarah read the abstract over Cora's shoulder. The agent was a complex molecule designed to bond to a prionic fold and reverse it. It was a patch, a cure for a disease he was knowingly about to unleash upon the world. And the patent for the cure would be owned by a private holding company registered in his name alone. He wasn't just selling Vance a flawed formula. He was selling him a crisis, and Thorne held the only solution. The $10 million was just the down payment on a lifetime of dependency. "We have him," Sarah whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of vindication. "Yes," Robert said, a grim smile touching his lips. "We do. Cora, package the data. I'm calling Mr. Vance. It's time to set the trap." Arthur Vance's corporate headquarters occupied the top 10 floors of a skyscraper that pierced the San Francisco fog, a gleaming testament to power and capital. His personal office was a study in minimalist authority. It was less an office and more a command deck, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a godlike view of the city and the bay beyond. It was here, at the heart of his empire, that he would spring his trap. The evidence Cora had extracted from GeneVex's servers was a digital smoking gun. It was everything Sarah had claimed and more. There were her original simulation files, time-stamped and unaltered, clearly showing the superiority of the glycine-based formula. There were her detailed research notes, all under her name. And most damningly, there was the hidden patent application for the cure, a clear indication of premeditated, malicious fraud. Vance's fury was a cold, controlled burn. He had been played for a fool, not by a brilliant strategist, but by a common thief dressed in a lab coat. The $10 million was trivial. It was the principle, the sheer audacity of Thorne's deception, that enraged him. Thorne had not only tried to defraud his company, he had tried to use Omnigen as the delivery system for a potential public health catastrophe. The plan Vance devised was simple in its execution, but brutal in its intent. It wasn't enough to just kill the deal and sue Thorne. Vance wanted to utterly dismantle him, to leave him with nothing. He scheduled a final meeting with Thorne at his headquarters for the following afternoon. The stated purpose was the final signing ceremony, a formality to celebrate the closing of the acquisition. He instructed his team to arrange for champagne and have the press releases ready. He wanted Thorne to walk into the room convinced of his ultimate victory. The morning of the meeting, Vance met with Sarah in a conference room adjacent to his office. She was dressed not in her waitress uniform, but in a simple yet elegant business suit his assistant had procured. The transformation was remarkable. Away from the exhaustion and humiliation of her job, the brilliant scientist within her had resurfaced. She was poised, focused, and ready. "Today you are no longer a waitress," Vance told her, his voice steady. "You are my lead technical advisor on this matter. You will be in the room. When I call on you, I want you to explain the science, just as you explained it to me. Calmly, precisely. Let the facts do the work." "What if he denies it?" Sarah asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "He'll call me a liar, a disgruntled employee." "He will," Vance said, "and he will be expecting me to believe him over you. He sees you as a powerless service worker. He sees me as a fellow member of the club. He will appeal to that perceived solidarity. That is his weakness. He underestimates both of us." Vance outlined the sequence of events. He would begin the meeting as planned. He would allow Thorne to savor his moment. Then he would begin to ask questions, slowly tightening the noose. Sarah's entrance would be the coup de grace. Vance's legal team, along with representatives from the company's board, would be watching from an adjacent room via a live video feed. As the time for the meeting approached, Sarah could feel her heart pounding. This was it, the culmination of 2 years of silent suffering. She was terrified, but beneath the fear was a bedrock of certainty. She had the truth on her side. At precisely 2:00 p.m., Marcus Thorne strode into the boardroom. He was beaming, the very picture of success. He shook Vance's hand warmly, his eyes sweeping across the opulent room. "Arthur, this is a magnificent space," Thorne said, his voice dripping with admiration. "A fitting place to begin our new partnership." I believe in creating the right environment for important decisions, Marcus, Vance replied, gesturing for him to sit. They made small talk for a few minutes. Vance allowed Thorne to pontificate on his vision for the future, the integration of their teams, the stock options that would make his key staff wealthy. Thorne was brilliant, charming, and utterly convincing. Watching him, Sarah understood how he had fooled so many people, including herself. Then Vance made his move. He picked up a tablet from the table, a direct echo of their dinner at the Gilded Compass. "Before we sign the final papers," Vance said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly, "my due diligence team had one final, minor query about the ST4 formula. A matter of scientific curiosity, really. It concerns the tyrosine residue at position 34. Thorne's smile remained fixed, but his eyes lost some of their light. "Of course. Happy to clarify anything. My team was running some long-range thermal stress simulations based on your data," Vance continued, his voice even, "and they found a strange anomaly, a potential for a prionic fold under sustained febrile conditions. It's a low probability, of course, but concerning. I'm sure your models accounted for this." Thorne's composure, so perfect and polished, began to crack. He had not expected this level of technical scrutiny. "A prionic fold? That's highly unlikely. An outlier. Our data shows unprecedented stability." "Perhaps," Vance said, swiping on the tablet, "but we also found this, a patent application filed 3 months ago through a holding company in Delaware for a secondary stabilization agent designed to counteract protein aggregation. The holding company, Thorne Innovations LLC, appears to be registered to you personally. Is this part of the GeneVex IP we're acquiring?" The color drained from Thorne's face. He stared at Vance, his mouth slightly agape. He was a chess player who had just realized his opponent was 3 moves ahead and his king was trapped. "That's, an exploratory side project," Thorne stammered, his voice losing its confident timbre. "Completely unrelated." "Unrelated?" Vance's voice was now laced with ice. "It seems highly related to me. It seems like you're trying to sell me a disease and the cure in 2 separate, non-transparent transactions. It seems like fraud." "That is an outrageous accusation," Thorne blustered, finding his voice again, fueled by desperation. "My reputation is impeccable. Who is feeding you this nonsense? Some junior analyst who can't read a datasheet?" "No," Vance said calmly, his eyes fixed on Thorne. "Not a junior analyst. My source is far more credible." He pressed a small button on the console in front of him. The door to the conference room opened, and Sarah Jenkins walked in. The moment Sarah entered the room, the atmosphere changed. The air, already thick with tension, became charged with a volatile, explosive energy. Marcus Thorne stared at her as if he had seen a ghost. His carefully constructed world, his entire triumphant narrative, was collapsing in real time, and the agent of its destruction was the woman he had dismissed and discarded like a piece of faulty lab equipment. His shock quickly morphed into rage. His face, usually a mask of charming confidence, twisted into a snarl of disbelief and fury. "You!" he hissed, pointing a trembling finger at her. "What is she doing here? Arthur, this is absurd. This is a disgruntled former employee I had to fire for incompetence and insubordination. She's mentally unstable. You can't possibly be listening to her." Vance remained perfectly calm, a still point in the escalating storm. "She is here, Marcus, as my technical advisor, and her analysis of your formula has been compelling." He turned to Sarah. "Ms. Jenkins, please explain to Dr. Thorne the flaw you identified in the ST4 catalyst." Sarah's heart was hammering, but Vance's calm demeanor was an anchor. She looked directly at Thorne, not with hatred, but with the cold, dispassionate focus of a scientist presenting her findings. "You substituted a tyrosine residue for the glycine at position 34, she began, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the fear she felt. "You assumed the hydrogen bond from the tyrosine would create a more stable scaffold. It was a logical assumption, but a flawed one. You failed to account for the entropic penalty of the rigid side chain under thermal stress. My original simulations, the ones you locked me out of before they were complete, proved that the glycine is essential for flexibility, preventing a catastrophic misfold cascade. Your formula creates prions, Marcus. You knew there was a risk. That's why you secretly patented a solution. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Thorne's defenses. He opened his mouth to retort, to spew more lies about her incompetence, but Vance cut him off. Before you respond, Marcus, I want you to see what my forensic team recovered from your servers in the early hours of yesterday morning. Vance tapped the screen of the tablet and turned it to face Thorne. On the display was a file directory. At the top of the list was a folder labeled Project Notes S. Jenkins. Vance tapped it, and the screen filled with pages of Sarah's own handwritten notes, scanned and digitized. He swiped again, bringing up her original simulation data, time-stamped months before the patent application was filed under Thorne's name. We have your original data, Marcus, Vance said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. We have her original data. We can see precisely where you copied her work, and we can see the single critical change you made. We also have the server logs showing you repeatedly accessing her files after you fired her. He swiped one last time. The screen now showed the draft patent for the cure, with tracked changes showing Thorne's own edits and his email correspondence with the patent attorneys from his personal email account. And we have this, Vance finished, the proof of your intent to defraud. Thorne stared at the screen, his face a ghastly shade of white. The evidence was absolute. It was incontrovertible. There was no explanation, no lie, no charming smile that could save him now. He looked from the tablet to Sarah, and in his eyes she saw the last vestiges of his arrogance crumble, replaced by the raw, ugly terror of a man who was completely and utterly ruined. This is illegal, he stammered, grasping at straws. You hacked my servers. This is inadmissible. A new voice, crisp and female, came from a speakerphone on the table, which had been silent until now. Dr. Thorne, my name is Catherine Wheeler. I am Omnigen's general counsel. What you are seeing is the result of a legitimate due diligence process, which your own signed letter of intent gave us the right to conduct. As for the admissibility, I'm sure your investors, who are about to lose their entire investment due to your fraudulent misrepresentation, will be very interested to see it, as will the district attorney. The mention of the DA seemed to suck the remaining air from Thorne's lungs. He slumped in his chair, a broken man. The charismatic visionary had vanished, replaced by a hollow shell. The fight was gone. Vance stood up, his towering presence dominating the room. The deal is off, of course. Our legal team will be in contact with yours and with your board of directors regarding the recovery of our due diligence costs and further damages. The evidence of your fraud will be made available to all relevant parties. I suspect you will be hearing from federal regulators as well. He walked over to Thorne and leaned down, his voice a low whisper, just as Sarah's had been in the restaurant, but filled with menace instead of warning. You built your success on the work of a brilliant woman you thought you could erase, but you were wrong. You didn't erase her. You just made her invisible for a while, and you never see the person who's invisible until it's too late. Vance straightened up and turned to his security chief, Robert, who had entered the room silently. Robert, please escort Dr. Thorne from the building. Thorne didn't resist. He was led from the room like a man walking to the gallows, his multi-million-dollar dream having evaporated into a nightmare of lawsuits, investigations, and public disgrace. The room was silent. It was just Sarah and Vance, the city sprawling beneath them. The battle was over. Sarah felt a profound sense of release, a weight lifting from her soul that she had carried for 2 long years. It wasn't triumph or joy, not yet. It was something quieter, more fundamental. Justice. Vance turned to her, and for the first time, she saw something other than calculation in his eyes. It was respect. You have a remarkable mind, Mrs. Jenkins, he said, and even more remarkable courage. It's a rare combination. He walked to the window, looking out at the endless horizon. Marcus Thorne made 2 critical mistakes. He underestimated your integrity, and he underestimated mine. Now the question is, what happens next? The consequences for Marcus Thorne were swift and absolute. Faced with incontrovertible proof of fraud, GeneVex collapsed into bankruptcy. Thorne himself was buried under an avalanche of lawsuits from his investors and a federal investigation into securities fraud. His name, once a symbol of innovation, became a byword for deceit. A week later, Arthur Vance summoned Sarah to his office. He began by presenting her with a $1 million check, a finder's fee for saving his company from a potential billion-dollar catastrophe. But his real offer was far more profound. "Your original work wasn't just brilliant, Ms. Jenkins. It was visionary," Vance stated, sliding a portfolio across the desk. He didn't offer her a simple research job. He offered her a chance to build and lead her own division, OmniGen Advanced Therapeutics. Vance was providing a $50 million seed budget, a state-of-the-art lab built to her specifications, and complete scientific control. Most importantly, her name would be on every patent. It wasn't just a job. It was the complete restoration of her stolen legacy. 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Jenkins stood in the center of that gleaming new laboratory, her hand-picked team working around her. The whisper in the restaurant had been the end of Thorne's story of deceit. This quiet, hopeful moment was the beginning of hers, a future where her vision would be realized, finally and truly, under her own name. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that courage and truth can come from the most unexpected places. It shows that the most important voice in the room isn't always the loudest, but the one brave enough to speak a truth that no one else can see. Her journey from a brilliant scientist to a humiliated waitress and back to a leader in her field is a testament to resilience and the enduring power of integrity. This single whisper didn't just save a $10 million deal. It averted a catastrophe and reclaimed a stolen legacy. If this story of justice and unexpected courage moved you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit the like button, share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and most importantly, subscribe for more true stories of hidden heroes and dramatic turning points. Let us know in the comments what you think. Who do you know that has a story of quiet courage? We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening.